Here we go. I've been thinking about the money, it's been shaking my mind. Barely make a living while I'm living in my prime. Selling out my life, I'm working for a lousy dime. No matter how hard I'm working all the time. When the week is finally done, I get my paycheck I find. While there may be lots of money, very little of it's mine. So I got me a ride down to the Bay Day loan, hoping I could get enough to get a place of my own. My mind was dazed by all the money I could get, and now I got nothing and I'm deeper in debt. Now who wants a money like that? Who wants a money like that? The system is disgusting, that's why I'm out here busking, and the rich are getting richer while the infrastructure's rusting. I'm working 3 jobs and still the debt is crushing the homeless population, learning not to be so trusting, cause the system don't care or listen to your fussing. To Congress only money talks and you can hear it cussing. The banks control the money for the profits of a few, and they make a lot of money but none of it's for you. It's all about the power and it's all about control. They're gonna use the money to enslave your soul. Now who wants a money like that? Yeah, who wants a money like that? Ah, but money shouldn't be some money-making deal. It's time to change the money, time to make the money real. You know how injustice and corruption makes you feel, like the world is against you and you got no way to deal with the awful aggravation watching greedy bankers steal. Now we can do it better, the solution's been found. History shows us how we can make the money sound. Create a public money that can pay it all down, an asset that is always circulating around, to make a better world with our feet all on the ground. Now who wants a money like that? I want a money like that.
Welcome, everybody. Can you hear me?
Whose song was that, please?
Howard Schweitzer.
And the title of the song?
Who wants a money like that? Now we're going to have a short video, after which Dorothy is going to take over.
Of us is getting bigger. The gap between the very richest and the rest of us is getting bigger. Why? A common belief is that it's good for us all if a small group of people earn an enormous amount of money. The theory is that their wealth trickles down to the rest of us. But this is a myth. In reality, money is sucked up from all of us into the pockets of a very small group of people. How does this happen? One reason is the way that money is created. Right now, almost all of the money in our economy is created by banks when they make loans. Now, most people assume that when banks make loans, they're lending out someone else's savings. But they're not. Instead, when somebody takes out a loan, banks create new money electronically by typing numbers into their account. 97% of all the money in our economy is created in this way, as people take out loans from banks. The more loans people take, the more debt there is, and the more money there is. The shocking fact is, if nobody went into debt, there would be almost no money in the economy. Our economy depends on the electronic money created by banks. But because the money is created when people borrow, someone, somewhere, has to pay interest on every pound created. In effect, we are renting the money we need to run our economy from the banks. This means that in the UK alone, together we pay the banks £192 million in interest every single day. And because the debt is held mostly by the bottom 90% and wealth mostly by the top 10%, paying this interest transfers money from the bottom 90% of the population to the very top 10%. It sucks wealth and income from the rest of us up to the very lucky few. So as long as we have to rent the money we use from the banks that create it, we'll have to keep paying this huge interest bill, and the gap between the richest and the rest of us will keep increasing. But there are ways to create money that don't depend on us all going into debt to the banks. We want to see money created by a public body and spent into the economy, so that we don't have to borrow all the money we need from the banks. This would lead to less debt and stop the gap between the richest and the rest of us getting even bigger. This is what we're campaigning for. Join us by signing up at Positive Money and sharing this video.
There you go, Dorothy.
The video you just saw illustrates how our money creation system works as a system of oppression and a form of violence. To many, that may sound like an exaggerated perspective and a provocative statement until we think deeper about what oppression and violence are. A common element among several standard definitions of oppression is that it is the domination of a power group, political, economic, social, or cultural, that acts to prevent subordinate groups from attaining access to resources or acts to inhibit or devalue them. So how is our money creation system oppressive? By bestowing power and advantage on certain groups and people while disadvantaging others based on money power. By creating an artificial scarcity of money, it transfers money from the many to a tiny elite. Our money creation system is also oppressive in the way it thrusts many people into poverty. And when your wealth is limited, your life choices are limited in many ways. For example, whether to live in a safe neighborhood or not. You need to make a choice about whether to pay necessary health care or pay for food, whether to pay your rent or your child's school supplies, whether to work 2 or 3 jobs just to meet your basic needs or spend time with your family, whether to keep living in a moldy, uninhabitable, and worthless trailer home with a 10% interest payment or be houseless. Such limited life choices are often invisible to others. So poor and low wealth people are often judged and demeaned for making poor choices. Our money creation system not only injures those who suffer from being thrust into poverty, it enslaves many to debt. Both poverty and enslavement to death destroy life by blocking the life potential of millions of people who suffer from malnourishment, are more vulnerable to disease and high stress, higher infant mortality rates, and reduced life expectancy. And that is a form of violence. So then we look at what is violence. The dictionary defines violence as the intentional use of physical force or power, threatened or actual, that either results in or has a high likelihood of resulting in injury. That narrow definition, however, does not take into account the wider scope of violence that is unintentional and may not be committed by an individual, and yet injures and does considerable harm, both physical and non-physical. More comprehensive conceptions of violence avoid some of these difficulties. One is that violence is any act or situation in which a person injures another, including direct attacks on a person's physical or psychological integrity, and destructive actions that do not involve a direct relationship between the victim and perpetrator. This definition and others like it broaden what we consider to be violence by emphasizing the consequences from the victim's perspective, by treating all types of violence equally, whether the perpetrators are individuals, groups, institutions, or society, and by including socially sanctioned violence, unintended violence, subtle or covert violence, violence that causes non-physical harm, and violence causing long-term consequences. Based on more comprehensive definitions of violence, our money creation system commits violence by injuring and causing suffering to those it thrusts into poverty and or enslaves to debt, without obvious links to individual perpetrators. It commits violence by destroying life, not with a single blow, as with physical violence, but by blocking the full development of the life potential of people. And it commits violence by creating a voraciously consuming mindset that results in squandering resources of future generations. Mahatma Gandhi's famous saying that poverty is the worst form of violence has meaning on many levels. Consider the manifestations of our money creation system as a form of violence and system of oppression on 3 levels: individual, institutional, and structural cultural, weaving a tight web of poverty and low wealth conditions into the very fabric of our economic system. Like an iceberg, we see only the individual level at the top, while the institutional and structural levels of violence are increasingly submerged from view. Like the submerged root of an iceberg at the bottom, the base of the triangle represents the firmly embedded ideological foundation that undergirds and gives rise to the institutional and individual levels of violence and oppression. The structural cultural level holds the conventional values and everyday social realities and relations that form a collective way of thinking, which in the United States is white supremacy, patriarchy, and other superior-inferior categorizations. Beliefs like acquisition is good, conflict and violence are inevitable. There must be winners and losers. At this level of violence, it's difficult to grasp that it's violence because it is rendered invisible by a passive acceptance of inequalities and deprivations, another belief that the poor will always be with us. And because social and economic indicators of inequality, such as differential infant mortality, premature death rates, and other avoidable differences, they just simply reinforce a belief in white, male, and other superiorities, instead of being accurately perceived as symptoms of violence. Beliefs at this level are deeply embedded in our collective psyche and form a distorted narrative that is very difficult to change. As Frantz Fanon wrote, sometimes people hold a core belief that is very strong. When they are presented with evidence that works against that belief, the new evidence cannot be accepted. It would create a feeling that is extremely uncomfortable, called cognitive dissonance. And because it is so important to protect the core belief, they will rationalize, ignore, and even deny anything that doesn't fit in with the core belief. Moving up the iceberg to the institutional level of violence in the middle, that level also is submerged from view so that its forms are almost completely invisible. Violence at this level includes harmful actions by institutions such as the Federal Reserve System, large commercial banks that obstruct the development of human potential. Violence at this level is not universally condemned because it is often subtle, indirect, covert, and involves long-term rather than immediate consequences. It includes harmful policies and actions such as discriminatory lending, that create interest obligations now estimated on average to be 35% of the cost of living, monopolistic control over work opportunities, deficient health care, insufficient housing. It is a form of violence not seen as such, and it is rooted in the wealth vacuum cleaner that is our money creation system. The tip of the iceberg represents harmful actions taken by individuals or groups against people or property. Like the tip of an iceberg, this is the violence that can be seen. But it is not seen, when it is, in a neutral, objective, or systematic way, but instead in a discriminatory fashion based on a superiority ideology and beliefs that are held at the structural level and implemented at the institutional level. For example, wealthy people who benefit from our money creation system are admired for being ambitious and successful, while poor and low wealth people are condemned for being lazy or poor money managers rather than being seen as targets of an unjust financial system of oppression. And much of the violence that we see at the individual level is most often not even called violence. The individual, institutional, and structural levels of a violent money creation system are interrelated and cannot be understood apart from one another. The violence of institutions and individuals gives expression to the dominant ideology of superiority at the structural foundation, and oppression is inherent at all three levels. Dominant beliefs and norms at the foundation rationalize institutional violence and depersonalize and decontextualize individual violence. To eliminate the oppression and violence of our money creation system, we look for solutions at all three levels. By building power and mobilizing those negatively impacted and their allies at the individual level, like the Poor People's Campaign movement is doing, for example, by changing oppressive and discriminatory policies and creating new systems at the institutional level, and by changing the distorted narrative at the structural cultural level. So now we'll move on in our presentation to Mary Sanderson, who will talk about what our money creation system does in a broader sense and present alternatives, both those that have been tried and those that have been proposed.
Many, many things. I want to start by saying thank you so much to Dorothy for this holistic view of our work, and especially about the hidden beliefs that affect our actions. I'm grateful to the Women, Money, and Democracy Comadres for all the conversations we have about this stuff and for sponsoring this panel. We are determined to help each other learn about money, how it works, and take our agency for fixing it. I'm here to ask if we can fix that institutional mess in the middle. I have to straighten something out here a little bit. There. I'm zeroing in on our money creation system called bank credit by economists. We amateurs call it debt money. The bank credit money system. But by zeroing in on this, I hope to show three things. The intent and purpose of money is built into the way it gets created. Our system of money creation, bank credit, is succeeding wildly in its purpose to concentrate wealth and power. And a historically grounded system to allow natural circulation of wealth and power is available. You might wonder how a retired postal worker and hospital interpreter came to this passion about the money system. Like many white people my age, I lost my innocence about our social system during the 60s. For me, it was when the National Guard attacked my university that forced me for the first time to question the government. Thank goodness. It's harder to question the role of the money system behind everything. It's never mentioned in our schooling. It carries a lot of shame, whether for having too little or too much, not to mention the impossible jargon and contradicting experts on TV. I recognized the money problem a little more easily because I grew up rolling my eyes every time I heard, goddamn bankers are stealing the farm, which turned out to be true. It still took 50 years for me to find a peephole into the money system that let me begin to understand. These are 5 reliable sources for the questions you will have if you start to take an interest in this. You could screenshot this slide if you want. The money talk in the media is an opaque and confusing mess, and people who are sincerely curious are going to have questions. In 2017, I met the passionate citizen scholars of the American Monetary Institute. AMI is the think tank parent of the Alliance for Just Money, a nonpartisan membership organization formed in 2019 to educate and engage wide public support for changing the system. There are 2 main ways that the bank credit system advances its interests. Interest collection is the first way. Like the video, this graph shows how the current system is succeeding. Only 1/10 of people collect interest from nearly all the rest of us. This makes bank credit money or debt money, it makes it a wealth concentrating machine. And well, the real problem, a power concentrating machine. Henry said it best. Who controls the money can control the world. The mechanism behind Henry's truth is this little trick of letting the private banks create and destroy our money for their own benefit. Here's a quick and dirty how it works on a personal level. You sign a note for $10,000. The bank keys $10,000 into your account. Over the next 3 years, you owe $13,000. Money to pay $3,000 interest is never created. That is a special feature of the debt money system. It is why there is always more debt than money. This graph shows household, business, and government debt together on the right. See how there was 4 times more debt than money in the whole system before all the COVID borrowing? Obviously, everyone will not be able to pay. The system demands losers like the ogres in Fairy Tale Mountains. This scarcity of money explains how people get so focused, even desperate, to get money. It explains how cities can go belly up. The ruthless race to pay and not be the loser drives the insane push to extract new physical wealth in a pathetic attempt to make Mother Earth pay. Back to your loan. If you manage to pay, your note is shredded. $10,000 goes back to where it came from, nowhere. And the bank keeps the $3,000 that you scrounged from the macroeconomy, what I call the big swirl. If you fail, failure on a home or farm debt leaves you in the street. Well, unless you are able to borrow more. And the ongoing need to borrow just to pay interest is how the red debt column got so high in the earlier slide. It's called compound interest. And it's one of the main ways the lenders have gained so much control through the centuries. Besides interest, the other main way banks gain power is by deciding what will and will not be funded. Prisons and resource wars. Prisons and resource wars are good investments in a debt money system. They pay interest and they help consolidate the bank's geopolitical power. No dollars are available to pay caregivers fairly because that is not a money-making activity. Please remember, this is all just baked into the whole system. I really appreciated the vacuum cleaner analogy in the positive money video we saw at the beginning. My nagging question for all these years has been, can the money system be changed to support soil and people and grandbabies? To answer, I had to look at where it came from. How did this even happen? The bank credit system was developed by European aristocrats and merchants, then by financiers, in the centuries before industrial capitalism. The purpose has always been power building. The method, renting out money and deciding who shall get to use it. It's not an exaggeration to say this debt money system is the main reason that Europeans could colonize the world. And their acquisitive culture still dominates. I see these 500 years of debt money as kind of human adolescence. European and US domination is a life-size game of King on the Mountain, marked by heavy risk-taking, ingratitude, mindless squandering of resources. Many, many indigenous cultures and their diverse money systems have been buried by the bank credit machine. Pointing the way forward, there are records of some of those lost systems, successes and failures, including the US Pennsylvania script and Lincoln's greenbacks, systems that shared a public welfare purpose. A common feature of all the failed systems is neatly summarized by Sir Josiah Stamp. He was the governor of Bank of England and the second richest man in England in the 1920s. The highlighted part is the common denominator of failed systems and the key to the challenge to this day. Leave the bankers the power to create money. Well, he says, after saying bankers own the earth, you can take it away. But if you leave the bankers the power to create money, and with a flick of the pen, they will create enough money to buy earth back again. This continues to be the problem with the banking system. For democracy and humans to survive our collective adolescence, we need a money system that intentionally serves the commons. We've learned from those many failures, and the situation is a little different now that the grandchildren of the all-powerful are under the same threats of climate change and nuclear holocaust as the rest of us. Money historians worked for 4 years with Dennis and Elizabeth Kucinich to introduce the Need Act in 2011. In 3 minutes, I'm going to let Dennis explain it. Only the first few seconds are dated.
Almost 4 years ago, Wall Street crashed our economy, an event that required massive taxpayer intervention to save the financial system from complete collapse. In the wake of that crisis, Congress passed a sweeping overhaul of financial laws that were supposed to help prevent another crisis from happening again. But Wall Street pushed back hard, and very little has changed. The banks that blew up the economy got trillions of dollars in bailouts, while millions of Americans lost their jobs and their homes. And, as the most recent jobs report shows, there's an ongoing economic crisis in this country with dire consequences for millions of Americans who are struggling. There's an obvious problem here. We have to ask ourselves, why is it so important to rescue the banks at the expense of the economy? It really comes down to who creates our money and for what. Banks create our money supply when they make loans. If banks don't make loans, we lose our money supply. This gives banks enormous power because they decide what gets funded and what doesn't. And they can hold us to ransom when they get it wrong. This is a serious problem for democracy. But it was never meant to be like this. Our Constitution clearly places the power to create money with Congress, not the banks or anybody else. The National Emergency Employment Defense Act, the NEED Act, H.R. 2990, reasserts the sole grant of constitutional power to create money to Congress. It does this in 3 steps. First, the Federal Reserve System is reorganized, put under the U.S. Treasury, where all new money would be issued without debt or interest, adding to revenue without taxing or borrowing, and spent into circulation to promote the general welfare. The money system would be monitored to be neither inflationary nor deflationary. Second, we would end the practice called fractional reserve lending, which allows private entities, mostly banks, to create and issue our money supply as interest-bearing debt. All previously created private credit would be converted into U.S. government money. Banks would then act as intermediaries, accepting savings deposits and loaning them out to borrowers. This nationalizes our money system, not the banking system. Third, new money is spent into circulation as the economy grows, and that money is used to pay for infrastructure, education, renewable energy, and other important needs in this country, as appropriated by Congress. This would create real wealth and career opportunities in the millions of new, good jobs. The national debt would also be paid off as it comes due. So let's take back control over our monetary system and fix our economy. Let's not stand idle any longer, waiting for the banks to save us. H.R. 2990, that is, the NEED Act, will get us moving again.
Yes, he proposes something hugely ambitious. But as the stakes get higher, more and more people, even rich people, are thinking about the grandbabies' futures. For our part, as Dorothy suggests, the first thing will be to break out of our mental cages and accept the possibility of a life-waging money supply system in place of the one we've got. On its 10th anniversary, the NEED Act is being updated and will soon be circulated as the American Monetary Reform Act, with the same 3 important measures, including, you see in the middle there, bank creation of money being stopped. I'm going to stop sharing again for a second. I often remember my dad's solitary and anguished studies, trying to figure out what had gone wrong to so humiliate him, losing the farm and his family. It was a great thing for me to find others who had been quietly researching money and power over these 5 decades, and really exciting that they actually have legislation available drawn from 1,000 years of history. Because of that farm background, when I first met AMI people and learned about the NEED Act, my knee-jerk response was not pie in the sky, like a lot of my progressive friends, nor nothing's that simple, Ma, like my sons. No, with monetary reform in mind, and the help of Erica Chenoweth and Uncle Milty Friedman, I have an ideal scenario in mind that's not unrealistic. And I have a song. So my ideal scenario, I'm going to share it with you right now. We know this Congress isn't even going to look at our bill. We know this. But, oh, hang on. I think I have to share then. We know that Congress won't look at it. But we also know we can trust the current system to keep serving up social shocks. Crises one after another. And old Milty Friedman was right about one thing, though he probably thought it only works in one direction. He said, only a crisis produces real change. When the crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend upon the ideas that are lying around. That, I believe, is our basic function, to develop alternatives to existing policies, to keep them alive and available until the politically impossible becomes politically inevitable. Well, so the Women, Money, and Democracy Committee needs all of us to help keep the NEED Act alive and use the rolling crises to educate until 3.5% of the country is participating. Then we'll seize the legislative day when the next boom goes to bust. I want to know, how am I doing for time? Let's see here. I don't have time to add anything, so I'm going to go straight to the next slide. Join us. I hope this has sparked your curiosity and courage to take up the money question with us. It is contentious and challenging, but more so energetic and hopeful. Just starting to talk with friends and family will help. Any action you take for public banking in your region or for the NEED Act nationally will raise the profile of this rather hidden key of privately controlled money. Among the 5 reliable anti-confusionary resources I gave earlier was the Alliance for Just Fund. The Alliance has bibliographies at 3 levels. 2 important petitions that need your signature, mentors and book circles that welcome newcomers.
Everybody, thank you so much, Mary and Dorothy. As the chair of the Women, Money, and Democracy Committee of WILPF US, I want to invite you to join us, just as Mary just did. You've heard about just one of the projects that our committee tackles. I'm proud that all of our projects explore how economics, currency, and banking affect our work for peace and the lives of women and families, and how they lift up solutions towards a new economic system that works for everybody. I'm going to share my screen now. I think we're all tired of feeling worthless unless we are defined as someone's profit margin. And that's often how we are defined these days, as consumers or the means to a profit. We're so much more than that, and we have so much more to contribute to our communities. Our committee examines new solutions for making our economy more just, more fair, more people-centered. We envision together what that might look like and how we support one another in pursuing these solutions. Solutions like challenging corporate power and asserting the people's rights. Our committee's webpage offers powerful tools for ending the legal fiction of corporate personhood and reversing the claim that political money is speech. These are existential threats to our democracy. Our 10th session study guide is great for lively and invigorating small group discussions. That's an important first step in organizing, and that guide still is very relevant. Our timeline of corporate rights documents a series of corrupt Supreme Court cases and graphically demonstrates the pattern of corporations stealing constitutional rights that were intended for human persons, not corporate persons. You'll also find a number of easy to mount plays that inform and entertain about these issues, because sometimes humor and the arts are the very best way to reach people. We're working on a research project to connect the dots between how debt fuels war and how war fuels debt. This project could use your help. In fact, all of these projects would be richer and more effective with you at the table. Our work lifts up feminist economic literacy and the real value women themselves bring to the economy. We're working with a partner, an economy of our own, to make spaces for conversations that lift up the solutions and innovations of younger women visionaries, to give them a megaphone so that they can't be ignored. Solutions like a solidarity economy, alternate forms of currency, cooperative ownership of businesses and farms, cooperative housing initiatives, and public banking. Check out the recorded Zooms we've already held on the AEOO website. Together, we're co-sponsoring an upcoming learning circle on public banking that starts Friday, August 27th. It's designed especially for women who may have no financial background or banking experience behind them. We encourage you to register to participate. There are only 20 places available. Learn all the ways public banking can take the money and power away from those big Wall Street banks and investment companies by restricting local public money for local investment. Right now, laws are advancing in states and cities to create public banks that can insulate communities against the kind of crash we saw in 2008. We can deny those banks the dollars they need to invest in faraway extractive industries and fossil fuels that add to the climate crisis. And keeping that money local means more money for fully funded schools, affordable student loans, accessible mortgages, and practical small business loans. So sign up to learn effective local advocacy for banking in your community. The 6 sessions will go through the fall and are led by experienced organizers. Even if you choose not to join our learning circle, you can download our public banking toolkit on our committee webpage and dip your toe into how public banks work and why it's so important. This toolkit kind of compresses the information that you could read 3 or 4 400, 500-page books to learn, and offers lots of additional resources as well. Together, our committee pursues these projects in a way that makes room for your questions, your perceptions, and creates space for solutions to arise and thrive. We don't have all the answers, but we're finding them together. If you want to explore together new ways of valuing each other and our resources, if you value lifting up women's ways of knowing about finances and economics, and you want to help other women do the same, please join the Women, Money, and Democracy Committee. You might meet like-minded women who are interesting and fun to work with. Mary and Dorothy and I appreciate your participation at this session, and we'd welcome your questions and your responses.
Hello. Gloria McMillan has given us a question, and we are very short on time right now. Can I take it, Marybeth?
Sure.
Yeah, the idea that changing the monetary system is only good for poor people, that rich women invested in the banking system might not see the virtue of it. True, the banking system is going to fight it. But the problem is that everybody's lives are at stake. And people, even the people deeply invested in the system, are feeling desperate about its running out of options. Internationally, it's not just a national thing either. The monetary reform needs to be done internationally. One reason that you're starting to hear talk about central bank digital currency, this is a response of some of the money controlling people to they're feeling like they're up against a wall. They can't control interest rates anymore with their usual management, and the money is too much and the money is too little and the debt's too much. So my point is, many individuals, even among those controlling classes, are increasingly seeing that it needs to be changed for something that works for futures, for possible futures and healing. That this whole deal about one war after another and everybody's trauma and every generation's trauma is worse than the one before, that is just not going to take even them anyplace nice. They can't all get on Mr. Branson's plane, you know. And I think that increasingly they will be seeing it. I don't know if you noticed in the presentation, I never mentioned an ism. I never blamed human greed. I don't believe that's the thing. It's a system that we have allowed to develop. And hey, if we're as smart as we think we are, or maybe half, we can maybe fix the system. That's my point. Are there other questions or comments?
Well, people are asking, you know, who are our allies at the federal level on this, and how are we going to reach outside of the usual suspects to work on this? And I have to say that increasingly, I see all of these pieces as legs on a stool. I see public banking, currency reform, the repeal of corporate personhood, and the money currency debt piece as part of all that we must do. None of them are going to succeed on their own. And I have to tell you that public banking is advancing in many states, and some federal Congress people are talking about both public banking and currency reform. And I'm thinking here of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders, each of whom have talked about both these things in the past. We need to normalize this thought. We need to normalize the concentration of thinking about changing the system. And we also have to find ways to do it incrementally so that people feel comfortable and safe making that transition. There's a lot of work that needs to go into this, and we're going to need allies to work on it. Maybe you could help us with that.
Did you find another question? Did Dorothy want
to? Can you repeat the three pieces of the NEED Act, Mary?
Yes. Banks will be stopped from creating money. Congress will create the money as the Constitution says it should in Article 1, Section 8. And the Federal Reserve System, which is owned by private banks, will be brought under the Treasury Department, become a truly government agency.
Nancy Price suggests that we all read Dennis Kucinich's new book, The Division of Light and Poser, how when he was a young mayor in Cleveland, he was threatened with assassination to keep the local corporation, which I think was the utility company, in public hands. The Cleveland wealthy and the mob wanted him to get out of town, but he's now running again for mayor of Cleveland. And yes, we have studied the publicly owned banks in Germany and Scandinavia and other countries. This is not a new idea. It's been tried successfully. And we're also looking at the concept of postal banking, especially for the unbanked, really poor people who may not even have an address with which to establish a bank account. All of these are things that we're working on this committee, and we'd love to have your help.
Thank you very much.
Can I jump in with something for real quick?
Real quick, because we are out of time.
Okay, never mind. Oh,
Okay.
I just wanted to say that this is incredibly hard to communicate. I'm on the committee, and when they started talking this stuff, I thought they were crazy. So when we talk to other women, we're really bucking against almost a collective psychology where we believe things about money, and what we're talking about goes against those deep-seated beliefs. So just stick with it. I mean, just keep exploring. Come join our committee, and we disagree and we challenge each other, and we're learning. Wanted to add that.
Thanks, Dorothy.